Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another TLDR video. I am your host, Voodoo Pickles, and today we're going to be talking about the Vampire Lestat. This is the second book in the Vampire Chronicles series written by Anne Rice. The first book was Interview with the Vampire. This book is broken up into three parts. The first part is when Lestat first wakes up, and the second part is his whole backstory, which is the main part of the book. The third part is the current times of when the book is happening. So Lestat wakes up in the 80s in New Orleans because he hears a rock band, and he decides he wants to reveal himself to this rock band and be the singer. And he shows them that he's a vampire. They're a little scared, they're a little freaked out, and then they're like, "What's your name?" And he says, "I am Lestat." And they laugh and giggle because they think he's cosplaying as the Vampire Lestat. And he doesn't understand really what's going on. And then they give him a copy of the Interview with the Vampire book. And he goes off, just disappears and reads it. When he's done reading it, he comes back and he is super pissed. He is so mad at the way that Louis portrayed him in the book that he decides he is going to start his own book, and he is going to make this band famous. And pretty much he's like, you know what it's time for? War. That's what it's time for. So that's what he decides he's going to do. So he has a lawyer set up. He has contracts out there for record deals, people making music videos, all of this set up. And then he's like, all right, we're on our way to being super famous. I need to sit here and write my book. And his book is his backstory. He was the seventh son of a marquis in France, and because he was the seventh son, there was really nothing for him to do. So he was just kind of around. He did a lot of hunting. His father squandered most of his fortune. So he hunted to make sure that they had food. It was one of his the best things that he did. And after he lost his horse and his hunting dogs after hunting for some wolves, he gets really sad, really depressed, and the only thing that brings him out of it is Nicholas. Nicholas is a son of a merchant who went off to Paris to go to college, but he dropped out of college because he wanted to play the violin. So him and Louis become super close. They become best friends. They go off, get drunk together, everything. And Lestat has tried previously to run away from his family, and they always caught him and brought him back. So they decide they're going to go run off to Paris together. And they do. They run away to Paris and they join a theater troupe. And they're happy in this theater troupe, and Lestat is kidnapped from their shared apartment and turned against his will. And once he wakes up as a vampire, his maker tells him that all of that is yours and sets himself on fire. And Lestat doesn't really know what to do, and he starts hanging around the vampires. He was never taught anything about being a vampire, so he's just kind of figuring out all of this on himself, except he's like a very extroverted type person. He ends up going back to the theater and meets up with everybody and buys it because he was left a bunch of gold. And so he buys the theater, and he refuses to really see anybody because they can tell that he's not him. But he starts providing for everybody. He makes sure that Nicholas has an apartment, that he has everything that he needs, makes sure the theater is set up, and he's just going off trying to find more vampires, trying to just hang out, just figure out what he's going to do. He's just wandering around Paris. He's been sending money back to his mother, and he finds out that she's sick, so he's trying to get her to go back to Italy, where she's from. And when he tries to get her to go back to Italy, she comes to Paris and she demands to see him. When he sees her, he realizes that she is dying. And so instead of letting her die, he offers her a choice to be a vampire. And she says yes. So he turns her into a vampire, and they run off. And she is super excited. She is no longer restricted by what she was in life. And she starts to wear men's clothing. She tries to cut her hair, but it keeps growing back. So she stops trying to cut it. She just kind of pulls it back. And she wants to run. She wants to jump. She wants to feed. She wants to go to all of these isolated places. And she just kind of wants to get away from people. And Lestat's just following her, letting her figure out what she wants to do. And while they're running around, they meet other vampires, and these other vampires kidnap Nicholas, and they hold him hostage. They bring Lestat and his mom Gabrielle. They bring him and his mom Gabrielle to the cemetery, where he sees that most of the vampires are wearing their funeral clothes. They're holding Nicholas hostage. They've already fed on him, and he's just kind of catatonic. And they are doing this trial, and they are saying that they are blasphemous because they're not Satanists. They did not agree to follow Satan's whim to dig themselves out of their graves and be like Satanists and not enter churches and stuff like that. And Lestat has entered churches. He was curious to see if he could go in a church. He went into a church. He was like, all right, I can do that. And so when this happens, Lestat starts picking on them. He makes fun of them. Their leader is Armand, who is the oldest one of the older vampires that Lestat has ever seen, but he's also in a child body. So he meets Armand. He starts making fun of him, and he causes a whole scene. And once everybody's kind of confused and everything, he grabs Nicholas, and him and Gabrielle, they run, and they go back to the tower where Lestat was made. And Lestat turns Nicholas. Gabrielle keeps telling him, don't do it. It's not a good idea. But he does it, and he turns Nicholas into a vampire. Once Nicholas wakes up as a vampire, he is super depressed. He refuses to talk. He barely feeds. He's in a very zombie-like state. And they end up making their way back to the theater, where there's some rogue vampires from that coven that originally kidnapped Nicholas, and they tell Lestat that he needs to be a part of their new coven because he needs to protect them, and that Armand went crazy and started killing all of them off. So he needs to make a new coven. He needs to protect them, and he's just like, no, go do something yourself. And then he tells them to put on costumes and to be acrobats and to work in the theater because they'll be able to blend in with the humans. And they start to do that. And Nicholas makes his way back to the theater as well, finds his violin, performs, and then that's the first time he's speaking to Lestat. And he wants to be back in the theater. He wants to be on stage, and he wants to be doing the violin thing, and he wants to turn the whole troupe that they originally started with into vampires. And Lestat says no. He tells them to be with the vampires that he told to be in the theater already, tells them to take care of him. He's going to leave him there. And Armand comes to Lestat and Gabrielle, and he wants to be with them. He wants to be with Lestat. He wants to learn from Lestat. And Lestat tells him that, no, we're not going to hang. We're not going to be with you. You're not going to be with us. And Armand lashes out, and he tells him that, Gabrielle's going to leave him. Nicholas they're going to resent him. They're going to hate him and everything. And he tells him that he knows Gabrielle's going to leave him, that they're not going to be together forever for the rest of their undead lives, that he understands that. But for right now, they're going to be together, and Gabrielle tells Armand that doesn't matter if they're together or not, they're still family. And they'll still be able to talk as family does. And they send Armand to the theater troupe to be in charge of them. And they decide they're going to go travel. And they start traveling around the world. Armand told Lestat about Marius, the vampire that made him. And he's leaving messages for Marius around, and they're traveling, and then eventually Gabrielle does leave him. She wants to be as far away from humans as she can. So she leaves him And this depresses Lestat, and he decides to go to ground, into this like deep sleep. And he's woken up by Marius, and Marius takes him to an island and introduces him to the king and the queen of all vampires, and tells them their backstory. He's hanging out there, and he plays for Akasha, the queen of the vampires, and she moves. She's interested in him, and everybody's kind of freaking out because they're in a statue-like state. And the king goes to attack Lestat, and the queen stops him, and Marius takes him back as well, and he's trying to fix them. And he tells Lestat that he needs to leave. He needs to leave, and he needs to go live a human lifespan among others or other humans. You need to at least have a human lifespan and to go. And so he's upset, and he doesn't want to go, but he has to. And they're telling him that he has to go. He goes to New Orleans because that's where his father is. There was the French Revolution that happened, and his father was chased out of his castle, and the rest of his family members were killed. So his father went to New Orleans and actually wrote to Lestat, and Lestat's lawyer has the letters. And so Lestat goes to New Orleans to be with his dad, and that's where he meets Louis, and that's where the interview with the vampire takes place. And that's kind of where he tells of when Claudia almost killed him, and he found his way back to Paris because Armand came to him when he was in his time of need, and Lestat helped him out. So he was expecting some reciprocation of that. He went to Armand to feed off of him pretty much and to become healthy again. He expected some help from Armand, and Armand used Lestat to cut off all the ties Louis had to anybody else. So Armand could be with Louis, and then he tried to kill Lestat, except he knew he couldn't because for some reason Lestat's really hard to kill, and it's just one unique thing that's to Lestat. He pretty much just told him to leave. And so he did. And it took him years of recuperation to get back to where he wasn't in a zombie state. And then he kept going to ground, and he kept waking up, and there was vampires and people around him that kept trying to create a coven with him, and he was completely uninterested, and he was just like, no. So he was just in this zombie-like state for a long time until he went to ground, until then he woke up in the 80s. And part 3 is after this. The book came out, there's albums are coming out, music videos, they're super rich and popular, and he decides he's going to set up a concert. And at this concert, he's expecting to meet a bunch of vampires going to come and attack him. And so he's very confident that he is going to kill all of these vampires and be fine. And at this concert, we were also introduced to Jessie, who's a human, but I'll talk about her in the next one, mostly. But in this one, in the concert, it does happen. He sets up the concert. We have Gabrielle comes back. Louis comes back to him, and they're like, you're crazy. You need to stop this. And he's like, nah, I don't think so. So they're like, well, if you're not going to stop this, because we really knew you wouldn't, we're going to help protect you. And they go with him to the concert venue. The concert goes off. Everybody's excited, everything. And then after the concert is when he starts getting attacked. Gabrielle and Louis, they help him out. They start protecting him. And Lestat is surprised that the other vampires are using modern technology to attack him as well. Like, they're actually using like automobiles, like vans with with like all of these type of things, and he's just like, wow, okay, cool. And he's pretty sure that Marius is going to be there to help him out, and when Marius isn't there, he's kind of becoming just like, oh shit, something's going on. I don't know if we'll be able to fight all of them, when all of these vampires start bursting into flames. And And Lestat thinks it is Marius doing that because Marius is like one of the oldest vampires he's ever known. So he thinks that's Marius protecting him. They go back to Lestat's house and they're like, cheers, we did the concert thing. Yay for us, we're alive. And it's almost dawn, so Gabrielle and Lestat, they go to ground, and another quirk with Lestat is he's able to stay up towards almost when the sun's fully out, like later than most of the vampires. So while he's doing that, he's like, something's bothering him. So he goes out to his shed. He's like, where's Marius? Marius is like, he can talk to me in his head. Where's Marius? He actually goes and sets up like an antenna and is using that to expand his mental telepathy, and he hears Marius sending out a warning that she's coming for him, and he is like, really, what? And then he is kidnapped by Akasha, and that's where the book ends. And that was The Vampire Lestat, the second book in the Vampire Chronicles series. And is this a totes or nope? I think if you enjoyed Interview with the Vampire, you will definitely enjoy this one, where Interview with the Vampire sounds like Louis being more of like an emo type teenager, young adult person. Lestat is more thought out on the backstory. It explains a lot of the actions. And if you read Interview with the Vampire and then towards the end in the second part of The Vampire Lestat, you get to understand all of these interactions that happened in the first book, but from Lestat's perspective, which creates a whole different depth to the situation. And I really enjoyed it. So far out of this one, I like this one better than I do Interview with the Vampire, so that is a definite totes from me. I rated it a 4 out of 5 stars, and thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Yeah, definite totes. I'm really excited about it. There's a lot in the Vampire Chronicle series. There's the original 3 that's just kind of there, and then they all branch off after that. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. You guys are amazing and awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. I will put a link to the long review in the description below, as well as where you can buy this book from your local bookstore or used from thrift books, or if you are in the United States, where you can find your local library to pick up this book through the library. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I will hopefully talk to you guys very soon. Bye.